Hi friends, I invite you all to listen to a brand new story. The first thing Emily noticed wasn't the silence of the woods but the sound that broke it. A faint, pitiful whimper, thin and trembling, like a lost child crying somewhere deep in the brush. She froze on the edge of the swampy meadow. The July heat shimmered in waves, pressing down on her small shoulders. Out here in the endless Montana summer, the air smelled of mud, stagnant water, and rot. Her sneakers squished as she took one step off the trail and into the marsh grass. Emily was 10, just a skinny kid with scraped knees, tangled brown hair, and a restless spirit that never let her sit still. Her father John, the town's game warden, had warned her 100 times to stay away from this bog. But that sound, that broken cry, didn't let her walk away. She pushed through the reeds, heart hammering, and then she saw it. A large animal half submerged in the black water. Its fur was matted, caked in mud, ears twitching weakly. Its head rested limply against a tuft of grass, eyes half shut. For a terrifying second, Emily thought it was already dead. But it wasn't. The faint flicker of its ears, the shallow rise and fall of its chest, there was still life. It wasn't fighting anymore. It had given up. Something in Emily's chest snapped. She couldn't just walk away. She crept closer, the mud sucking at her shoes, and that's when she saw why the creature hadn't escaped. A steel trap, old and rusted, clamped tight around its back leg. Her stomach turned. One of those illegal traps. John had told her about them. Hunters who ignored the law, setting snares for wolves and coyotes, leaving animals to die slow, ugly deaths. The thing caught in the trap wasn't a coyote, though. At first glance, Emily thought it might be a big shepherd dog, but the closer she got, the more wrong it looked. Its frame was heavier, its muzzle longer, its paws broad and wild. A wolf. And it was dying right in front of her. Emily bit her lip until it bled. She was only 10, but she wasn't going to stand there and watch. Not when she could do something. She scrambled back to the trail, gathered broken boards from an old collapsed fence, snapped dead branches, anything she could carry, and dragged it all back to the edge of the bog. Piece by piece she laid them down, building herself a shaky little bridge across the muck. Her hands blistered, her arms ached, sweat poured down her temples. The July sun baked her skin red. But she didn't stop. For almost an hour she worked, inch by inch pushing forward until she reached the animal. By then her knees were torn up, her sneakers soaked, and her body trembling from exhaustion. She dropped to her knees on the final board, the stench of mud and blood rising into her face. The wolf's eyes opened slightly, golden, cloudy with pain. Emily felt a shiver crawl down her back. Fear told her to turn and run. But the fear was drowned out by anger. Who could do this? Who would leave a living creature to die like this? Her small hands shook as she grabbed the cold steel jaws of the trap and tried to pry them apart. Nothing. The springs were too strong. She cried out in frustration, her voice swallowed by the empty swamp. Her father had shown her once in their barn how those traps worked. "You've got to put your weight into it, Em," he had said. "Push the springs down with your foot and the jaws will loosen." She braced her little sneakers against the rusted levers, gripped the trap and pushed with all her might. It didn't budge. She tried again. And again. Her legs shook. Tears stung her eyes. "Please," she whispered. "Please just let go." And then with a screech of metal, the jaws snapped open. The wolf's legs slipped free, raw and bleeding. Emily gasped and collapsed backward, shaking. She had done it. She had actually freed it. But the wolf didn't move. It lay limp, its head dropping against the wet grass. "No," Emily choked, crawling closer. She pressed her ear against its chest. For a moment she thought she heard nothing. Then, faint, steady, almost hidden under the rush of her own pulse, she caught it. A heartbeat. Weak but there. He was alive. She hooked her arms around the animal's thick neck, grunting with effort. It was heavier than she imagined, like dragging a sack of wet cement. Her arms burned. Her back screamed. But inch by inch, she hauled the wolf across the planks and onto solid ground. By the time she collapsed in the grass, she was too drained to cry, too exhausted even to breathe properly. The wolf lay beside her, chest rising and falling shallowly. She stared at it for a long moment. She knew what her father would say: "It's dangerous. It's a predator. You stay away from it." But leaving him here wasn't an option. If he stayed, scavengers would find him. Or the trapper who set that steel jaw would come back. Emily turned her head. In the distance, behind their ranch house, she saw the weather-beaten outline of the old barn her grandfather had built decades ago. Nobody used it anymore. The roof sagged, the walls leaned, but it was shelter. Would have to do. Emily pushed herself to her feet, grabbed the wolf under his chest and started dragging him toward the barn. He was massive, almost bigger than she was, but she rolled, shoved, and stumbled inch by inch across the field. Every step felt impossible. Every yard was a victory. By the time she reached the barn, her arms were raw, her shirt torn, her legs trembling. But she had done it. She had gotten him out of the swamp. She had hidden him where no one would find him. Where he would be hers and her secret. The barn smelled of dust, old hay, and rusted iron. Emily pushed the heavy door open just enough to squeeze inside, dragging the limp wolf over the threshold. He collapsed onto the straw in the darkest corner, his sides heaving with shallow breaths. Emily knelt beside him, her whole body shaking. Her hands were scraped raw, mud caked her arms and knees, and her face was streaked with sweat and tears. But none of that mattered. He was alive. She scrambled to find anything she could use to help. An old water bucket, a rag stiff with age. She filled the bucket from the pump outside and carried it back, setting it near his muzzle. The wolf didn't move. "Please," she whispered again, nudging the bucket closer. His nose twitched, but that was all. Her stomach clenched. She needed more food, medicine, something. But first she had to get home before anyone noticed. From the barn's cracked window, she saw the porch light flick on. Her father's voice carried across the yard. "Emily, dinner's ready." Her chest tightened. If he saw her now, covered in mud and scratches, dragging around buckets of water, the questions would come fast. And if he found the wolf? Panic surged. Emily dashed out the back door of the barn, wiping her hands on her torn shirt, and ran toward the house. She skidded to a stop at the porch, trying to slow her breathing, trying to look normal. John stood there, tall and broad-shouldered, his face set in the stern look he wore when he suspected trouble. "Where have you been?" he asked, his voice low. His gray-green eyes scanned her muddy clothes. Chasing butterflies," she blurted, forcing a laugh. "I fell in the creek." His brows drew together. He didn't look convinced. But after a long pause, he just sighed. "How many times have I told you? Stay out of the swamp. It's dangerous." "I know, Dad." She ducked her head. He studied her a moment longer, then finally said, "Wash up. Your mom's waiting." At dinner, Emily could hardly eat. Every time her father set down his fork or her mother poured iced tea, she jumped, afraid they could somehow hear the pounding of her heart. Her thoughts weren't at the table. They were back in the barn with the wounded wolf breathing raggedly in the dark. As soon as the meal ended and the TV flickered on in the living room, Emily slipped away. She filled a bowl with leftover stew, snagged a hunk of cornbread and poured fresh water into the bucket. Then, barefoot and silent, she crept across the yard. The barn door creaked when she opened it. He froze, heart hammering. No lights came on from the house. Inside, the wolf's golden eyes gleamed faintly in the dark. He had shifted, his head lifted, watching her. Emily stopped short. The air in the barn seemed to thicken. Those eyes weren't like any dog's. They were sharp, ancient, wild. Fear crawled down her spine. But then the wolf let out a low, broken whine and tried to move his leg. The sight of his pain dissolved her fear. "It's okay," she whispered, setting down the food and water. "I won't hurt you." She pushed the stew bowl closer, then stepped back, sitting cross-legged against the opposite wall. Minutes dragged by. The wolf stared, unblinking. Then finally he lowered his head and lapped at the water, slow and trembling. Emily exhaled in relief. "That's it," she said softly. "Drink. You'll feel better." After a while he sniffed the cornbread, nudged it aside and returned to the water. The meat he ignored. Emily smiled faintly. "Hey, not a fan of stew." She watched him for hours, whispering stories into the dark. About how she hated moving from the city. About the friends she never made in school. About how her mom always seemed busy and her dad was too serious. The wolf didn't answer, of course. But in the stillness, with his steady eyes on her, she felt less alone. She decided then. He needed a name. "Gray," she said finally. "That's you. Strong, quiet, wild. Gray." The wolf blinked once, slow and calm as if accepting. The next morning things began to unravel. John had always been sharp, noticing things Emily thought she'd hidden well. That day he spotted the missing meat from the fridge, the trail of disturbed grass near the barn, the mud tracks on her sneakers. By afternoon his suspicions hardened. He circled the yard, scanning the barn. Emily's heart seized as she watched from her bedroom window. He lingered near the door, squatting to examine the ground. His shoulders stiffened. He had found the paw print. A wolf's print. John stood there for a long moment, then straightened, jaw clenched. Without a word, he strode back to the house, straight to the locked gun cabinet in his office. Emily's breath caught. She knew what was coming. That night, when she slipped back into the barn, Gray's strength had returned enough that he lifted his head and sniffed the air as she entered. His wound was ugly, swollen, but his eyes burned brighter. He let her sit beside him now, even rest her hand lightly against his rough fur. For the first time he leaned forward and touched her wrist with his cold nose. The smallest gesture, but to Emily it felt like a promise. And that was when the barn door slammed open. John stood in the doorway, shotgun in hand, eyes blazing. "Emily," he said, voice like gravel, "step away." Gray rose, hackles bristling, lips peeling back to show teeth. His growl rolled low and deep, filling the barn. Emily's body moved before her mind caught up. She threw herself between them, arms spread wide. "No," she screamed. "Don't shoot him." The world froze. Father, daughter, and wolf locked in a triangle of fear and defiance. For a moment no one breathed. The barn was filled with the deep growl of the wolf, the rapid pounding of Emily's heart, and the heavy silence of John's hesitation. "Emily," John said again, his voice steady but hard. "Move. Now." She shook her head violently, tears streaking her dirt-smudged cheeks. "He's not bad. He's not what you think. Please, Dad. He's my friend." "Friend?" John's knuckles whitened on the stock of the shotgun. "That's a predator. A wild wolf. He could kill you in a second." "He won't," Emily cried. "I saved him. Look at him, Dad. He's hurt, he's scared. But he's not dangerous. Not to me." Gray's yellow eyes never left John. His muscles were taut, ready to spring if the man made the wrong move. Emily could feel the tension humming in the air like a wire about to snap. John's finger hovered near the trigger. One mistake, one twitch, and it would all be over. Finally, John exhaled, a ragged, frustrated breath. He stepped back, slammed the barn door shut, and dropped the heavy wooden latch across it. From the other side, his voice came low and grim. "You're staying in there until you understand what you've done." Emily's fists pounded the door. "Dad, don't hurt him." No answer. Just footsteps retreating toward the house. She pressed her forehead against the rough wood, sobbing. Behind her, Gray stood close, his hot breath stirring her hair. When she turned, he licked her hand once, as if telling her he understood. The news didn't stay secret for long. Their nearest neighbor, Mr. Harris, was a wiry old rancher with a permanent scowl carved into his face. He'd lived on the land longer than anyone and hated wolves with a passion. Emily had heard the stories, that he set traps, poisoned meat, did whatever it took to keep predators away from his cattle. That night, as John and his wife argued in hushed, urgent voices about what to do, Harris overheard from his porch. Word traveled fast in their small Montana town. By the next day, half the neighbors were whispering, "The warden's kid has a wolf. A live wolf in their barn." Fear twisted the rumors, turning them darker with each retelling. Some swore the wolf had already attacked. Others claimed John was planning to keep it as some kind of pet. By evening, the whispers had grown into a restless, angry crowd. Emily sat with Gray in the barn, stroking his coarse fur when she heard it. The crunch of boots outside, the low murmur of voices. Gray stiffened, ears pricking, lips curling. Through a crack in the wall, she saw flickering beams of flashlights and the glow of lanterns. Shadows moved, 5, maybe 6 men. One of them pounded on the barn door. "John, open up." It was Harris, his voice sharp, carrying through the night air. "We know what you're hiding. That animal's a threat, and we're not gonna stand by while it rips our livestock apart." Emily's stomach dropped. Inside the house, the front door creaked open. Her father's voice boomed across the yard. "This is my property, Harris. You've got no right storming onto it." "We've got every right," Harris shot back. "That wolf's dangerous and you know it. If you won't do your job, then we will." The men behind him shifted, weapons glinting in the lantern light. Shotguns, pitchforks, even an old axe. Emily clutched Gray's fur. His body trembled with a low growl that vibrated through her bones. Her father strode across the yard, placing himself squarely between the barn and the crowd. "Nobody's touching that wolf. You hear me?" "You've gone soft," Harris sneered. "Your own daughter's at risk and you're standing there protecting a killer." John's jaw tightened. "The only killer I see is the man who sets illegal traps." His eyes bored into Harris. "This is your doing, isn't it?" A murmur rippled through the men. Harris stiffened. "Careful, Warden." Emily couldn't stay silent. She shoved the barn door just enough to squeeze through and stumbled into the lantern light. "It was his trap," she shouted, pointing straight at Harris. "I found it in the swamp. It nearly killed him." The crowd fell into uneasy silence. All eyes turned to the girl. Mud-streaked, clothes torn, standing barefoot in the dust with fire in her eyes. Harris barked a laugh, but it sounded forced. "She's just a kid. Doesn't know what she's talking about." Emily's hands trembled, but her voice rose stronger. "I pulled that trap off his leg myself. It was rusted, broken, and covered in his blood. I know what I saw." Her father's gaze cut across the men, sharp and unyielding. "You hear her? That wolf isn't the threat. The real danger is standing right there." Harris's face turned red. He lifted his axe, glaring at John. "Enough talk. If you won't protect your family, we will." The men stirred, uncertain. Some muttered, some shifted their feet. The fear that had brought them here was being eaten away by doubt. And then it happened. From inside the barn, a sound split the night. A long, mournful howl, rising from Gray's chest, piercing the darkness like a blade. It wasn't the savage snarl of a predator. It was grief, pain, loneliness given voice. The men froze. Even Harris faltered, his axe lowering slightly. The howl echoed through the valley, ancient and haunting, until the night swallowed it whole. When it faded, the yard was silent. John stepped forward, his voice steady. "That's not a monster. That's a wounded animal. And if you kill him, you'll have blood on your hands that you can't wash off." The men shifted again. One by one, their weapons dropped. Pitchforks lowered. Shotguns sagged. But Harris's eyes burned hotter. His pride, his anger wouldn't let go. He raised the axe high. "Stand aside, John." John tensed, ready to act, when headlights flared at the edge of the yard, blinding the crowd. A white van skidded to a stop, dust curling in the beams. On the side, the red cross and words "Wildlife Rescue." The driver's door flew open and a woman in her 30s climbed out, her dark ponytail whipping behind her. Her eyes swept the armed crowd, sharp and fearless. "Step away from that barn," she ordered. Emily's heart leapt. She didn't know her, but John did. Relief flashed across his face. "Sarah," he breathed. The wildlife vet had arrived. The crowd wavered, caught between Harris's fury and the authority in the newcomer's voice. Sarah slammed her van door shut and strode into the lantern light, her boots crunching on gravel. She looked small compared to the broad-shouldered ranchers, but her confidence filled the yard. "What's going on here?" she demanded. A dozen men with guns and axes, surrounding a child and her father? Over an injured wolf. "It's not just a wolf," Harris spat, lowering his axe, "but not by much. It's a threat to this town. We're protecting our families." "No," Sarah snapped, her dark eyes blazing. "You're covering for the fact that someone's setting illegal traps." She pointed at the old axe in Harris's hand. "And I have a pretty good guess who." A ripple of unease moved through the men. They shifted, looking at Harris, then at John. The balance was shifting again. Before Harris could retort, twin beams of light cut through the night. A police cruiser rolled up behind Sarah's van, red and blue strobes flashing against the barns and trees. The siren gave one short whoop before dying. Two officers stepped out, one young, his hand near his sidearm, the other older, a broad man with lines etched deep into his face. He took in the scene: the armed men, the girl, the barn, the wildlife van. "All right," the older officer barked. "Everybody drop the weapons. Now." Reluctantly, pitchforks clattered to the dirt, shotguns were lowered. Harris's axe lingered a moment longer before it, too, fell with a dull thud. The officer's gaze narrowed on him. "Name?" "Harris," he muttered. "Yeah. Thought so." The officer's eyes cut to the rusty steel trap lying in the dust where Emily had dragged it out earlier. He prodded it with his boot, expression darkening. "This yours?" Harris opened his mouth, but Emily beat him to it. "It was his. I saw him looking for the wolf the night I found it." Her voice trembled but didn't break. "That's his trap." The officer stared at Harris. The silence stretched. Then he nodded to his partner. "Get him in the car." "You can't prove." Harris's words were cut off as the young officer took his arm and guided him firmly toward the cruiser. The crowd broke apart like water. With Harris gone, their fear seemed foolish. Men shuffled away, muttering, ashamed of what they'd almost done. Within minutes, the yard was empty, save for John, Emily, Sarah, and the officers. Sarah turned back to John. "Show me the wolf." Inside the barn, Gray lay low in the straw, his eyes glowing in the beam of Sarah's flashlight. His leg looked worse now, swollen, the fur around it crusted dark with dried blood. "He needs care," Sarah murmured, kneeling carefully, keeping her movements calm and deliberate. "We'll sedate him, load him into the van, and take him to the rehab center. He'll be safe there until he's healed." Emily's heart clenched. "And then?" Sarah gave her a gentle smile. "Then he goes back to the wild where he belongs." It sounded perfect. The best ending she could have hoped for. John set down his shotgun, shoulders finally relaxing. "Do it." Sarah pulled out the tranquilizer rifle, loaded the dart, and took aim. Gray tensed, ears flicking back. Emily crouched beside him, stroking his neck. "It's okay, Gray," she whispered. "She's here to help." Sarah steadied her aim. And then, nothing. The barn was empty. For a heartbeat, no one moved. John blinked, then spun, searching corners. The straw was disturbed, the shadows shifting, but the wolf was gone. Emily gasped. "He was right here." John's gaze swept the wall and found it. Near the back corner, one board was splintered open, ragged edges fresh. A hole gaped wide enough for a desperate animal to squeeze through. "He's gone," John muttered. Sarah hurried outside, shining her light on the ground. Clear paw prints marked the soil, leading toward the tree line. The back left print dragged slightly, smearing into the dirt. "He's still injured," she said grimly. "But he's moving." Emily's chest ached. She pressed her hand to the hole in the barn wall, as if she could still feel the warmth of his body. He hadn't waited. He hadn't let them help. John's hand settled heavy on her shoulder. He's a wild animal. He did what wild animals do. But Emily couldn't shake the sting of it. After everything, the swamp, the trap, the mob, Gray had left without a goodbye. The following days blurred into anxious routine. Harris was charged with multiple counts of illegal trapping and released under strict watch while awaiting trial. Most of the neighbors wanted to forget the whole night had happened. But Emily couldn't. Every night she dreamed of golden eyes disappearing into the trees. Every morning she checked the edge of the woods, hoping for a glimpse. Weeks passed. Summer deepened. Then strange things started happening. In the forests outside town, hunters began reporting odd kills. A hare torn down with a single clean bite to the throat but otherwise untouched. A deer found dead but only a strip of meat eaten. It wasn't the work of coyotes. They tore their prey messily. It wasn't bears. They gorged themselves. This was something else. John, with his ranger's instincts, knew what it meant. Gray had survived. He didn't tell Emily. He didn't want to give her hope. Instead, he set trail cameras deep in the woods. And one morning he found proof. On the small, grainy screen of his camera, a wolf stared straight into the lens. Broad shoulders, thick coat, eyes glowing faint in the flash. The left hind leg dragged just slightly as he stepped. Gray. Alive. John didn't tell anyone. Not even Sarah. Not even his wife. But Emily noticed the change. The long nights in his office, the maps spread across his desk, the quiet way he stared into the woods like he was listening for something. He knew. Her father was tracking him. The first sign came one moonlit night in late August. Emily was half asleep when a sudden burst of barking rattled the house. Their puppy Max, a floppy-eared mutt she had rescued weeks earlier, was going wild at the window. His hackles stood stiff, his teeth bared, a sound too deep for such a small dog rolling from his chest. Emily stumbled out of bed and hurried to the glass. The yard glowed silver under the Montana moon. Nothing moved. But Max didn't stop. His eyes were locked on the treeline, body trembling with alarm. "Shoo," she whispered, stroking him. "It's just a deer." But in her gut she knew better. A floorboard creaked behind her. She turned to see her father standing in the doorway, flashlight in one hand, his hunting rifle in the other. He didn't speak. He only looked at her, then stepped outside. Emily pressed to the window as he swept the beam across the yard. His boots crunched on gravel. For a long moment, nothing. And then he stopped near the fence. Slowly he crouched, angling the light down. She couldn't see what he saw. But when he straightened and returned, his face was pale and grim. "What was it?" she whispered when he stepped back inside. He shook his head. "Go to bed." But she caught a glimpse of the mud on his boots, the haunted look in his eyes. And she knew. Gray had been there. The next morning, when her father left for town, Emily sneaked to the fence with Max. She scoured the ground, her hands shaking. It didn't take long. There, pressed into the soft earth, was the print. Large, heavy, familiar. One paw dragged slightly, smudging the soil. Her throat tightened. He had come back. She crouched, touching the print with her fingertips. Max whined low beside her, uneasy. But Emily only smiled through her tears. "He remembers us." It became her secret. Just like before. She didn't tell her father, who was growing more withdrawn each day, or her mother, who busied herself in the kitchen pretending everything was normal. Emily carried the truth alone. Gray was close. But danger followed close behind. A week later, word spread through town that something had killed one of Harris's old neighbor's sheep. The fence had been broken, the carcass left in the dirt, throat torn. The whispers began again. Wolves. Emily overheard the hushed voices at the diner, saw the suspicion flare in the townsfolk's eyes. At home, she found her father sitting in his office. Maps spread wide, red pins scattered like drops of blood across the valleys. He didn't notice her at first. He was staring at the lines, his jaw tight, his hand gripping the table so hard his knuckles shone white. "Dad?" she asked softly. He looked up too fast, startled. "What are you doing here? What's happening?" "Nothing," he said, closing the map with a rough shove. "Just work." But she had already seen the pattern. The pins weren't random. They marked sightings, kills, trails. And at the center of them all, close to their home, was Gray. That night, John sat his daughter down at the kitchen table. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed him. "Emily, I need to tell you something." Her chest squeezed. She knew what was coming. "I've been tracking the wolf." "Your wolf," he admitted. "He's alive, but he's getting closer to town. He's hungry, desperate. He killed livestock. That makes him dangerous." "No," Emily whispered. "Not to us." "Dangerous is dangerous," John said firmly. "Sarah's coming back tomorrow. We're going to capture him. It's the only way." Her throat burned. "And then what?" He hesitated. "If he's healthy, maybe they'll keep him in the sanctuary. In a cage." The word felt like broken glass on her tongue. He didn't answer. Emily pushed back her chair so hard it screeched. She ran upstairs, slammed her door, and pressed her face into the pillow. Her wolf. Her Gray. After everything, they were going to lock him up. Unless she stopped them. The plan came to her in the dark. Simple. Reckless. Terrifying. She would find him first. Warn him. Lead him deeper into the wilderness. Away from the ranch. Away from Sarah's tranquilizer darts. Away from her father's maps and pins and rifles. Emily packed in silence. A flashlight, a half-empty water bottle, bread stuffed into her backpack. Max whined at the door, but she hushed him with a pat. "Stay here, buddy. I'll bring him back safe." Then while the house slept, she slipped into the night. The forest loomed darker than ever, every shadow alive, every branch creaking like a warning. Emily's flashlight beam cut a narrow tunnel through the blackness. She whispered his name as she walked. "Gray, it's me. Emily." The silence pressed heavy around her. Fear clawed at her chest, but she pushed on, step by step, deeper into the wild. After nearly an hour, she stopped. Her breath clouded in the cool night air. Something moved ahead, a shadow breaking free from shadows. Golden eyes caught the beam of her flashlight. Gray. He stood over the carcass of a deer, massive shoulders tense, his muzzle stained dark. For a heartbeat, they just stared at each other. Her fear melted away. She lowered the light and stepped forward. "It's me," she said softly. "I found you." His ears flicked. He didn't growl. He only watched, breathing hard, his chest rising and falling. Emily took another step. And that was when two more shadows slid from the trees. Wolves. Larger than Gray, their bodies lean and hungry, their eyes sharp with challenge. They spread out, circling. Gray's fur bristled. He lowered his head and growled, teeth flashing. Emily's heart lurched. These weren't his family. They were strangers. A rival pack. And Gray was alone. The clearing exploded in violence. One of the wolves lunged, snapping jaws aimed for Gray's throat. He dodged, slamming into the attacker with a snarl, teeth clashing in a blur of fur and sound. The second wolf circled, waiting for an opening. Emily pressed against a tree, frozen in terror. She could hear the ragged tearing of breath, the guttural snarls, the vicious crack of jaws colliding. Gray fought with everything he had, but he was weaker, slower, his legs still dragging. Blood sprayed across the moonlit grass. He was losing. "No!" Emily screamed, stumbling forward without thinking. "Stop. Leave him alone." The rival wolves faltered, startled by the shrill human cry. Gray used the moment, lunging, knocking one back. He staggered, sides heaving, but planted himself between Emily and the attackers. She was trembling so hard she could barely stand, but she met his eyes, and for an instant she swore she saw recognition. Trust. The rival wolves snarled, but their leader paused, golden eyes narrowing on the strange sight. A wild wolf and a child standing together side by side. A low, sharp bark left his throat. A command. The two rivals backed away, melting into the dark. Emily sagged against Gray, tears streaming down her cheeks. He was bleeding, trembling but alive. He leaned into her touch as though drawing strength from her small hand. "You're safe now," she whispered. "I won't let them take you." The forest was silent again, but Emily's ears still rang with the echoes of snarls. She pressed her small hand into Gray's thick fur, feeling the tremor that rippled through his body. His wound bled fresh, staining the grass with each step he took. She swallowed hard. "You can't stay here," she whispered. "They'll come back. You'll die." Gray swayed on his paws, but when Emily started walking he followed. Limping, dragging but following. They moved slowly through thickets and over creek beds, until the faintest glow of dawn began to touch the horizon. Emily's muscles screamed, her throat raw from thirst, her flashlight long dead. But she kept glancing back, and every time she did, his golden eyes were there in the gloom. By the time the ranch lights appeared through the trees, she was half carrying, half guiding him. Max's barking carried faintly across the yard, sharp and frantic. Emily stumbled into the open, her heart soaring with relief, and froze. Her father stood on the porch, rifle slung across his shoulder, his face drawn and pale. Beside him, Sarah adjusted the strap of her tranquilizer rifle, her expression tight with disbelief. "Emily." John's voice cracked the morning air. "What have you done?" She couldn't answer. The words tangled in her throat. She only stood there, dirt-streaked, trembling, one hand resting on the wolf's bloodied shoulder. Gray lowered his head, ears flat, but didn't bare his teeth. He stood still, chest heaving, his golden eyes locked on the man with the gun. John's jaw clenched. He raised the rifle slightly. "No." Emily's cry split the dawn. She stepped in front of Gray, arms wide, tears streaming down her face. "You can't. He saved me. He fought off the others. He protected me." Sarah's head snapped toward her. "Others? A pack?" Emily gasped. "They tried to kill him. And me. But he didn't run. He stayed." The words hung heavy, raw, and desperate. John's hands trembled on the rifle. "Dad," Emily whispered, her voice breaking. "Please. Don't make me watch you kill the only one who's ever listened to me. The only one who trusts me." The silence stretched, unbearable. The morning birds had begun to sing, but even they seemed hushed. Finally, Sarah stepped forward, lowering her weapon. "John," she said softly, "look at him. He's not attacking. He's letting her touch him. You know what that means." John's eyes burned. "It means he's too weak to fight back." "No," Sarah's voice was firm. "It means he's choosing trust. That's rarer than you think." Emily turned to her father, her cheeks wet, her voice trembling. "You always told me to protect what's right. Well, this is it. This is my turn." The rifle sagged. John's shoulders heaved as though carrying a weight far greater than the gun. He closed his eyes, then lowered it fully, the barrel dipping toward the dirt. For the first time, Emily saw tears glinting at the corners of his eyes. He looked at her. Really looked at her, and saw not just his little girl but someone braver, stronger, someone who had made her own choice. With a long, shaking breath, he nodded. "All right." Emily nearly collapsed from relief. Sarah stepped closer, speaking carefully, almost reverently. "He won't survive long on his own. But I can help him if he lets me." She lifted the tranquilizer slowly, showing it no sudden moves. Emily crouched by Gray, cupping his muzzle in her small hands. "It's okay," she whispered. "She'll help. I promise." Gray's ears flicked. He blinked once, slow, deliberate. And then, though his body trembled, he stood still. The dart struck his flank with a soft thwip. He flinched, a low growl rumbling, but Emily's hand on his neck steadied him. Within moments, his legs folded. He sank into the grass, eyelids heavy, chest rising and falling in deep sedation. Emily pressed her face into his fur, sobbing quietly. "You'll be safe now. You'll live." John knelt beside her, his big hand resting gently on her back. "So will you," he whispered. Together they watched as Sarah and her team lifted Gray onto a stretcher, careful, respectful, as though he were something sacred. The sun broke fully over the mountains as the van doors closed. Sarah looked at Emily. "He'll need weeks, maybe months. But if he recovers, we'll release him. Deep in the wilderness where no traps and no mobs can find him." Emily wiped her eyes. "Can I see him again? Just once?" Sarah hesitated, then nodded. "If he makes it, you'll know." The van rumbled down the dirt road, carrying Gray into the rising light. Emily stood in the yard, exhausted, her body aching, her heart torn between grief and hope. Her father put an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. For the first time she didn't resist. "You did something I couldn't," John said quietly. "You saw what he was, not what people feared. You made me see it too." Emily leaned against him, her eyes on the disappearing van. "Goodbye, Gray," she whispered. "Find your way home." Autumn came early that year. The air sharpened, mornings edged with frost, and the mountains that towered beyond the valley dusted themselves with the first veil of snow. Life slowly slid back to normal, at least on the surface. Harris had been hauled into court. His traps confiscated, his license revoked. The whispers that once fueled fear in town now condemned him. Neighbors who had once marched at his side now crossed the street to avoid him. But for Emily, none of that mattered. Every day after school she walked to the barn, not because Gray was there, but because the smell of straw and the faint indent in the corner where he had lain kept her close to him. She would sit with Max at her side, telling stories to the empty space as if the wolf could still hear. Her father watched her with quiet eyes. He didn't scold, didn't tell her to grow up. Sometimes in the evenings she caught him looking out across the fields the same way she did, toward the dark ridge of pines, as though both of them were listening for the same faint echo of a howl. Weeks stretched into months. Winter pressed harder. The nights grew longer, darker. Then one evening, Sarah drove up their long gravel road. Emily bolted out the door before the engine even stopped, Max barking wildly at her heels. "Is he okay?" Emily gasped. Sarah smiled, exhaustion lining her face but warmth in her eyes. "Better than okay. He's healed." Emily's chest tightened so sharply it hurt. "Can I see him?" Sarah hesitated, then nodded. "Tomorrow. If your father agrees." Emily turned toward the porch where John stood with arms crossed. Their eyes met. For a long moment neither spoke. Then slowly John nodded. They drove out at dawn. The sanctuary sat deep in the foothills, ringed by endless pines. The enclosures stretched wide, built to mimic the wild as much as fences could. When Emily saw him, her knees nearly buckled. "Gray." He stood tall and strong again, his coat thick and gleaming, his golden eyes burning with a fire she had thought she'd lost. The scar on his leg was there, but faint, healed into his stride. For a moment he didn't notice her. Then his head turned, ears flicked, and his gaze locked on hers. Emily pressed against the fence, tears streaming freely now. "Gray," she called, her voice breaking. He didn't run, didn't howl. He simply walked forward, slow and deliberate, until only the fence separated them. He pressed his muzzle against the wire. Emily's small hands slid through, resting against the warmth of his fur. The world fell away. For a heartbeat it was the swamp again, the barn again, the clearing again. A girl and a wolf bound by something neither of them fully understood but both trusted completely. "Thank you," Emily whispered, "for coming back. For not giving up." Gray blinked once, slow. Then he stepped back, lifted his head and let out a low rolling howl that carried through the sanctuary, through the trees, up into the pale sky. Sarah placed a hand on Emily's shoulder. "Tomorrow," she said softly, "we release him." The next day was colder, the mountains crowned white, the air sharp as glass. A small group gathered at the forest's edge: Sarah, her team, John, and Emily. They opened the transport crate and Gray stepped out into the snow-dusted grass. For a long moment he stood still, nostrils flaring, eyes scanning the wilderness. Then he looked back once, straight at Emily. She held her breath. Her heart screamed to call him back, to beg him to stay. But she didn't. He understood now. He wasn't hers to keep. He never had been. "Go," she whispered. Gray turned, muscles coiled, and in a blur of motion he vanished into the trees. Silent. Free. The forest swallowed him whole. Winter passed. Spring followed. Life went on. But sometimes, in the soft hours of dawn or the hush before sleep, Emily would hear it. A distant echo rolling from the ridge. A howl. Long and low. And every time she smiled through her tears. Because she knew. He hadn't forgotten.
Bye-bye!